Okay, welcome to our next Digging Deeper talk with Theology of the Body educators. We're very blessed today to have Mrs. Louise Kirk with us from England to speak about a very important topic regarding sexual education of children in schools and in the family. And let me introduce our speaker. We're very blessed that she is with us, giving of her time. So Louise Kirk is the UK co-coordinator of the Alive to the World Relationships and Character Education program. The program's creator, Christine Vollmer, was greatly influenced by the teaching of St. John Paul II and sat on the Pontifical Council for the Family and the Pontifical Academy for Life under him and Pope Benedict XVI. Mrs. Kirk is a passionate believer in teaching the young the full truth of the human person, of sexuality, and the importance of marriage. Sex education reaches all children regardless of faith and can be used as a form of pre-evangelization. The role of parents as first educators is of prime importance, and she wrote her book, Sexuality Explained, a guide for parents and children to help them in their task. As members of the Lords and Commons Family and Child Protection Group, Mrs. Kirk has contributed to lobbying the UK Parliament on various pro-family matters. She has spoken widely at conferences, at home and abroad, most recently leading a series of talks on the importance of theology of the body and the science of family in Kazakhstan. Okay, so Mrs. Kirk, thank you so much for your time, for being with us, and I'll give the microphone to you, and I'm very excited and happy to listen what you have to tell us today. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Nick, very much indeed, and thank you all for joining me, or joining us. I'm more experienced at speaking in the flesh, and of course I'd love to be there standing with you, but I realize that there's an extra benefit in being able to reach people in so many different countries, so I'm very blessed for that. I thought I'd start by a little bit of showing off, actually. I don't suppose you can recognize me. Can you see that picture? A much younger version of me is there. And just before that picture was taken, just too late when the photographer did that, St. John Paul actually put his hands on my head and blessed me. That was a long time ago, and it was just after a Congress on fatherhood in the Vatican, which was one of the great surprises of my life. I've had many surprises in this journey of talking about the importance of family and the importance of theology of the body and of the true education of the young. I never quite know what I should be doing next, but it is a question, I think, of entrusting myself with all the rest of us to Our Lady, to St. Joseph, and under the guidance of St. John Paul, always with the Holy Spirit, to do things which might at first look impossible. So might we perhaps, yes, here we go. I'll try and share my screen. It's gone. Just a minute. Well, it was there before. It's gone. Beautiful teaching.
This meeting is being recorded.
Theology of the body is one of the most beautiful of teachings, and I think it's something that we all absorb and take into our own spiritual lives. You already know a lot about it. I know that because anyone who's been on this site before would have seen some of your earlier very, very good speakers, including Christine Ward, who's someone I know myself, and I've actually been in person to the talk that she gave you online. What I'm going to do today is not talk about theology of the body as such, but say, are we really good at teaching it, specifically at schools? I'm not talking about the theology, I'm talking about the whole, the theology and everything that supports it, so that it can fire young people in practice. Now, one of our Catholic dioceses, this is obviously in England. Oh, it's not going to the next slide. Sorry, I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. So, one of our can you read the writing on the right, because I've got people's images there. Perhaps you can't, but anyway, this is what one of the diocesan curricula said when it came to talking about sex education. To begin with, it talked about theology of the body in the ways that all of you would be familiar with and its beauty, and then it went on to say, in a society where contraception, divorce, same-sex partnerships, sex before marriage, and cohabitation are often accepted as part of normal family life, the church's teaching can seem outmoded, even unrealistic and authoritarian. It is not always easy to promote and defend the church's teachings, let alone to promote them as the best way of living. That is, the way to true, lasting human happiness and fulfillment. So, where's the optimism there? Where's the solution? If we don't believe that God's teaching on morality is good news, not just for us, but for everybody, what does it say about God? It's even more poisonous when children move from their religious education lesson to sex education. Their subject is generally presented in ways that we'd rather not know about. But it will often also go on to the facts, which are lifted straight from, in England, the Family Planning Association, i.e. to promote contraception. There may or may not be a little bit about natural family planning as well. But if you were to judge by the effectiveness out in society of those who actually want to get married, you'll find that the few who turn up to the church for that are usually living together and using contraception. The fact is, it isn't working. Now, just a minute. Next. Theology of the theology of the body may be very beautiful, but young people will be looking at the bottom line. What is its practical application, and how much is it going to cost me? Why and how am I going to behave differently from other people? Because, of course, we don't live in isolation. We are all part of a culture. And finding our place in society is difficult enough when we're adults, but when we're young, with hormones swirling and developing our own sense of identity as well as our sexual identity, it's just not easy if it's not made very clear and very practical. So if the bottom line facts don't ring true, and if the disciplines requiring us that they require don't stand up to scrutiny, is the rest going to be true? And you can often find that children lose not only their sexual morality, but also their whole faith, because they haven't been adequately educated. And you should add to this that most young people are actually very kind, and they want to be kind. And I've certainly read that one of the main reasons why many young people lose their faith is because they think that we are unkind to homosexuals. It's not only young people who are misguided in this field. Unfortunately, it's also true of prominent people in our church. Again, I'm referring to things that are in England, and if you can read this, these I'm taking from two different religious education curriculum directories for Catholic schools and colleges in England and Wales. Now, the first was in 2012, and the second has just been produced. That's in 2023. Now, in the 2012 version, if you flick up Theology of the Body, it's mentioned, as I remember, about 4 times. And the first one comes right at the very beginning under something called Some Key Features of this Revised Curriculum Directory. And under that, it says, there is a renewed emphasis upon Catholic social teaching, the Catholic understanding of virtue, and Theology of the Body, written prominently at the start of the directory, and contraception is referred to 3 times during the course of the book. In 2023, the curriculum just published. There is no mention of Theology of the Body. There is no mention of contraception. There is no mention of homosexuality. But there are mentions of abortion, euthanasia, IVF, genetic engineering, eugenics, as well as gender and gender dysphoria, to be fair to it. But can you see how dangerous this is? When a member of the Catholic Education Service was called out on it, he said, "Oh, but we do talk about the dignity of the person and the body and the moral implications of this in line with the Catechism. But we all know that things like genetic engineering and euthanasia are very important, but they're not exactly of key importance to a young person starting out in life. There is nothing more factually important for that young person than understanding contraception and indeed homosexuality." Oh, sorry. Oh, I can't bear it. It's gone wrong again. There we go. Because this is the key question. As St. John Paul always told us, the family is the first cell of society, but the sexual embrace is the nucleus of that first cell. And how we treat the sexual embrace is critical to understanding the whole of human life and the whole of human love. The two must be joined together by God for a good reason. I mean, God is too clever just to put together such important things just by a whim. What I suggest is that with contraception, which takes apart the two things that God put together, we're witnessing something like a nuclear explosion with as much destruction of human life and human love as the physical nuclear explosion, but in a different way. It has introduced abortion, divorce, homosexuality, IVF. Now we're witnessing something even more worrying, and that is demographic decline of outstanding proportions. You may or may not have come across the demographer Stephen Shaw and his very revealing film, Birth Gap. What he is telling us is that now in many countries of the world, 1 in 3 women are remaining permanently childless. And obviously this is the same with men too, but you know, men and women are a bit different. It's easier to look at the women. 1 in 3. Now that is absolutely staggering. And he's saying that it has been introduced very recently, as late as there was a vast decline between the years 1973 and 1979 in many different countries of the world. He's relating the demographic decline not so much to smaller size of families, but to the fact that there's a growing number of men and women who don't have children at all. Christine Ward, I'm going back to Christine, in her talk a couple of times back, that St. John Paul created his Theology of the Body in part to explain the Church's teaching on contraception, because that teaching is so very important. She suggested that she could give you some of the principles of Theology of the Body in 10 steps. So I'm going to imitate her, and I'm going to give you 10 steps towards showing you why teaching how we can reverse the teaching of contraception in sex education. This is a very bold undertaking because it's a huge subject, and of course you can't cover something in 10 easy steps. But what I'm trying to say is that sex education was introduced around promoting contraception. We often forget that because it's given rise to so many other strange things, but that is absolutely at its heart. it is now billowing out into all sorts of areas of family life, and we know that only too well. But this can also be turned around and seen as a benefit, because we can actually see one poison which is attacking so much else, whereas some other people just look at the whole of family breakdown and don't know where to begin. We can say, look, there is something very specific where we can begin, we can start rooting it out. Not only that, we know how they promoted contraception so very widely, and that is through sex education. So if we can take hold of the sex education and reverse what they've been doing to promote our own view of the wholeness of the human person, we've got a hope of beginning to reach out to the next generation. So, next. Is this impossible? Yes, from a human point of view, because it's huge. But we also know that if we rely on God, he will help us. And I always like to think that because we can go to Jesus and say, I trust in you, he likes it all the more because we're little and have so little to give in return. Accept that trust. I also love one of the sayings that St. Faustina drew out of him. Do you remember, she said somewhere in her diary that she was asking for something, and he said that that's very big. And she said to him, but Lord, you know it's easier for you to do something that's big than something that's small. And he agreed. So yes, let's go to Jesus and ask him for something that's very big. So I'm now going to take you through 10 general points of how one can turn around sex education. Now, I'm not going to go into how we can actually do it in the classroom. I'm just going to give you 10 overall goals that could be included. The first one is extremely important, and that is that Humanae Vitae and all that it includes applies to everyone. Now, when John Paul talked about contemporary man becoming unknown to himself, he didn't add contemporary Catholic has become unknown to himself. He didn't answer to his answer to what is sexuality isn't what is sexuality for the Catholic, what is my body for the Catholic, what exactly is love for the Catholic. These are general questions and they apply to everyone. So if there's a problem with contraception, it applies equally to everybody we meet. This again is extremely important because I found in an awful lot of the training given at schools that having said what the church teaches, it goes on to say, but of course this is what Catholics say, and you may have a different view and might have a different conscience. And so they quickly unpick all the truths that are being put before the children. It also means that we're being challenged to reach out to people who are not Catholics with a great deal of confidence and know that they will have the echoes in their heart that we have in ours. It's a way to do the pre-evangelization and draw them to theology of the body. My second very important point is that parents have both a right and a duty to teach their own children. Many of you will recognize these as the words of St. John Paul all over again. He brings them into Familiaris Consortio, and it's also in the Truth and Meaning of Human Sexuality, which is the Vatican's guidance on teaching sexuality to children. Right and duty. A lot of parents don't particularly want to take that duty up. They find it difficult. It's a modest subject. And we're also presented with the problem that many parents don't actually, they don't understand the church's teaching. And if they do teach their children, they'll be teaching them to use the contraceptives we're trying to get them to avoid. And so for that purpose, that I wrote my book, Sexuality Explained, a guide for parents and children, to help parents to teach their own children. It's taken from the biology rather than from God and theology, and it's done in the form of stories to make it easy for children and for the parents. My third point is that all sexual education should avoid offending children's modesty. Now, we know, again, from theology of the body, if not from our own common sense, that nakedness has a very real value in God's eyes and in our own lives. It is there as a protection of what is beautiful and what is good. If we rip away children's modesty, we are ripping away from them one of their necessary protections. And we know that sex educators do that on purpose. I have moved from saying why it's so important for parents to teach their own children into the classroom now. And I say that this is also important because, well, partly because there is sex education in the first place, and if you don't take it over, all sorts of other things will be taught to the children instead. But the fact is, sex education reaches every child, not just the children from good parents who will do things at home. So once you've got the children being taught at home with the help of schools, parishes, anyone else who's there to hold the hands of parents and to encourage them in their task, then you can build that up at school and show them that it's not just their own families that teach this, that it makes sense in the wider environment too. It's natural for children to want to get support from their own peers, and it's also natural for them to want to see that what they're taught at home isn't just those people at home, but it applies in a wider area, and it creates, if you like, a pool of clean water in which children can thrive. Now, of course, most of true sex education is nothing to do with the intimacy of the body. It's helping children to understand themselves as a boy and as a girl, to understand their own and other people's emotions. It's teaching them not to suppress their emotions or to suppress their understanding of the world, but to take charge of them, to take possession of them, to develop their willpower and their critical thinking. Because you cannot be in a position to give a gift of yourself to another person if you haven't first taken possession of yourself. My fourth point, building on the general education of children in relationships, it is very beneficial to teach them fertility and fertility appreciation. I don't know what it's like in all of your countries. In England, you have to teach contraception. It's actually by law, you have to teach contraception in secondary school. But you don't have to teach it at any particular age, and it makes sense to teach the fertility first. So it doesn't make sense to teach how to get rid of fertility without actually teaching fertility. And where it is well taught at school in single-sex groups, preferably in small classes with teachers who are well trained, it is found that the children respond with reverence for their bodies, with increased modesty. It's also important to realize that it's actually healthy to be curious about our sexuality. That itself is not bad at all. But we want to be able to answer children's questions correctly, truthfully, and in a way that leads them to understand all that God has given them and the purpose for which it has been given. It is absolutely correct that young people will be learning from each other, and where they have other good adults guiding them, they can be led to learn all sorts of things which parents at home may not know. There's an awful lot of new science in this area, which is absolutely fascinating in its own right. One of the things I found very sad recently, I don't know how many of you have come across Louise Perry. She's an author in England who's shot to fame with her book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, and she appears all over the blogosphere. But one of her conversations was with someone called Chris Williamson, and in the middle of it, here they are both coming from, if you like, the sexual revolution past. That's what they were brought up with. And they're both saying, if young people had understood how the other sex worked, they wouldn't have got themselves into many of the pickles that they've ended up in. And I couldn't help thinking, gosh, how sad. You've been all this sex education and they still don't actually understand how the other sex works. My fifth point is that the overarching aim of all relationships and sex education should be to teach chastity and marriage. And I'm talking about this from the age of 5 up. I don't mean to say you actually have to teach marriage at the age of 5 up. What I'm trying to say is that if you don't have an overarching aim, you'll get lost in the middle. Whereas if you have that aim, you can put all the building blocks into their place. You can also look to see what perhaps the state is asking you to teach, and to see how you can make use of that to teach in a positive way and not get too distracted. We're not only talking about trying to avoid cohabitation, important though that is, and I will stress how important it is because, again, around the world, it's the poorer people, the most vulnerable people who are not getting married, and the richest ones, the most professional people who are still getting married. So apart from anything else, we're getting a cultural divide, which is very dangerous. So it's social policy to teach marriage right across all people. But quite apart from that, as I mentioned the Stephen Shaw film, there are an awful lot of women who are now not even having children at all. And he goes on to say it's not only 1 in 3 women in many countries who are just not having children, but only about 10% of them are childless by desire. There are many others who just haven't found their man, or have found themselves infertile because they've postponed things for too long. We're also experiencing something called hypergamy, where women are educated more than the corresponding men. It's often have better jobs, and it is now well established sociologically that women just don't want to marry men who are not of the same level as them. So it is part of the vision of theology of the body that we should keep remembering that we are here to image the Holy Trinity itself and to promote family. And this comes above everything else that we learn at school. So giving them keeping children's desire for marriage alive, I stress keeping it alive because it's normal for children to want to get married, giving them the courage to put it first. This is what we're after in our sex education. Oh, it's disappeared. Don't know what's happened then. Sorry, has it gone back to the beginning?
You can see.
Next, I'm very sorry, something's happened there. My 6th point is that we should teach the asymmetry of male and female. It's not difficult to teach equality. Equality is taught everywhere. Of course, we're equal in the sight of God in our human dignity, in our calling to image God. But he has made us asymmetrical in the way he's expressed that. Man and woman are not the same as each other. We each have our own roles. We each have our own dignities. And you go back to the story in Genesis, and you can see how that plays out. If woman had sinned and man had not sinned, we wouldn't all inherit original sin. It is the man's sin that we all inherit. And this is all just part of the asymmetry of the male and the female. It is within the family. This actually happens to be a picture you won't recognize. It is a picture of me, my husband, and our first child, and I've always rather liked it as the asymmetry of the male and the female. What we are trying it's within the family, of course, that the the unequalness, if you like, of male and female come to the fore most clearly. If you're in a job, you know, you might be, I don't know, a lawyer or something. You can be a lawyer just as much as a man or as a woman. But if you're in a family, you're a man as father, a woman as mother. They are distinct. So what we're trying to get across is that man and woman are not designed to be in competition. We're interdependent. We teach everything about man and woman with love. Of course, where that asymmetry rubs most hardly, or in the most difficult way, is in the two drivers that a woman has within herself. The drive for mother and family, of husband, mother, and child, and the drive to do something with her own talents outside the family. It's a creative tension which I like to think of as reflecting Our Lady, Virgin and Mother. I like to think of it as a creative tension, but tension it is, and it always has been. It is at the heart of what feminism is all about. And that has been one of the drivers, of course, of the sexual revolution. Women have very strong emotional drives in both these two directions. What the contraceptive revolution has done is to push the outside of the home ideas, or the work for people outside the family, before that of the work for the family within the home. I think part of that is also because a girl at school can, you know, go up the academic ladder, and that goes straight on into future training, everything else. You can make all the steps for yourself. You can't actually immediately summon up the man of your dreams and have him there beside you and sort of engineer it in quite the same way. So it's easy for a girl to be taken up the ladder to career. Of course, this also means that when you're thinking about the education of girls at school, you need to take them on board her career advice, because very often schools aren't even allowed, perhaps, to talk about motherhood in the same way that they will talk about careers. But actually what we need is to show that both are as important as the other, so that there is a career to have, to be a mother and have to run a home, as well as to do whatever it is outside the home. You can do both. You can take one and then another, but they should be given equal priority. And I'm glad to say that this is beginning to be said in political circles, because people are so worried about the fall off of babies. The latest science is emphasizing the importance of that mother and baby relationship, particularly in the first years. So that is again something to teach and to draw out, that it's not a good idea to put children in nurseries if you can help it. And again, there are big financial concerns there, and sometimes mothers are not able to do anything else. But where possible, it's good for the mother to stay at home. And that comes on, of course, to the unique role of father. This can be, again, horribly controversial, even though we know how important it is. The father isn't just an additional mother. He's the protector, the provider, the leader of the family. This is difficult to teach, we don't deny it, when there are so many children in a classroom who come from broken homes. But likewise, it's the boys from those broken homes who need the messages most. we know again from St. John Paul that any attack on human fatherhood is a direct attack on the fatherhood of God. God is Father, and human father is an image of that fatherhood. It is especially important, again, to give boys who are most vulnerable at the bottom of society the aspiration of wife and having children support, relying on them. And one of my friends has done a lot of work on that. And she says that actually the impact is great even at school. If boys know that one day they will be the main breadwinner of the family, that can have an impact at their studies when they're still at school. If boys don't get an outlet for their manhood, they can be diverted into violence, into gangs, into same-sex attraction. They can also be diverted into porn and into the false comradeship that you can get in video games. What we are seeing is marriage being taken, is men being taken out of the marriage market. Another reason why there are so many women who are not having the children they want. Something that perhaps many people may not think of as part of this is my number 9, restoring work to its true value. Something I believe in very strongly. I was always a full-time mother myself. And it made a huge difference to me when somebody said that as a mother, you are a professional. Whether or not something is paid is neither here nor there. Now, again, we know from our teaching of theology of the body, our goal in life isn't to earn money. Our goal in life is to become Christ-like, to become Christ himself within the body, within his body, within the body of the church. This is very real teaching. And what we're actually seeing is our Lord's warning of God or mammon being lived out. In many ways, children at school are being told that their training at school is for their career, for how much they can earn. They're also being told to be self-reliant. I think very often when we think of money, we think in terms of luxury and that sort of thing. But actually what gives money its attraction, I think, more than anything else, is the sense of security and the sense of independence. I find it actually quite shocking, but I've heard it now on several occasions, that many modern women find it difficult to take their husband's money when they start having children. I just think that's incredibly sad. When you go back to the marriage vows, you can see why it's important that we share all our worldly goods. When you make money an idol for children as they go through school, it doesn't actually stand up. We can see how many youngsters are depressed, older people are depressed. I know in America there are now about 7 million men of the core working age who are neither employed nor looking for work. In England, we have about 5.3 million people of core working age who are neither working nor studying or looking for work. This is terrible, and it's a terrible sadness for those people involved, but of course it's a terrible drag on all our economies. It is something that we need to do something about. So it is extremely important that both boys and girls are taught that the value of work is very much greater than the money we earn. The first person who benefits from the work done is, of course, the person who does the work. It's where we hone all our virtues and where we are able to make a sacrifice of ourselves for others. We give of our bodies, not only sexually in the marriage bed, we give of our bodies through our work, through our labor. So girls should be taught that work in the home is just as important as working for a salary, and men should also be acknowledged for the huge amount of work that they do, both in the home and in the community, without being paid. And my 10th point is that we should make use of the huge amount of the latest science which supports all of this. It's remarkable how much we are discovering human nature supports the Church's teaching in every instance. Quite often I'm lucky enough to go to the World Congresses of Family, and I remember in one of these, in a country actually where a lot of the speakers weren't Catholic, one of the speakers standing up and saying, "Thank you, all you Catholics, you have done so much for us. You have given us the vision and in many ways the practical skills which has made the support of the family possible." What I'm suggesting is that we should go to this whole subject with a new confidence. We should be able to say to other people, your sex education belongs to the 20th century. We are 21st century. We take care of the environment and we take care of the human person. We are ahead of the science. We are ahead of the game. And it's with that sense of confidence, as well as the sense of faith that I spoke of before, that we can hope to transform the subject of sex education. As I say, it is too valuable just to let it go. We've got to do something, because if we don't do something, it is too dreadful, but it is also something which reaches everybody. So going very quickly through, Nick did say that I was the UK coordinator of a character education programme called Alive to the World. And I just mentioned some of the topics that we teach in Alive to the World. Character education, not in any way religious, I should say, but within that, we're able to speak about the unity of the body and spirit, what it is to be a person, not an animal, the difference and complementarity between male and female, that sexuality is a fact and a force, the meaning of love, the difference between solitude and communion, getting on with others, healthy respect for authority, the importance of body language, and of course, the big importance of friendship. That is our programme, Alive to the World. And you can see that our website is alivetotheworld.co.uk. There is also an alivetotheworld.org, which is the international version. And just to mention again, this is my book. If you go to the UK version of the website, you'll find it on there, Sexuality Explained, a guide for parents and children. So that's it, and I'd be delighted to